If you look at old, grainy footage of the Vietnam War, one image is burned into history. The doors of a UH-1 Huey thrown wide open, and a lone soldier perched on the edge, gripping the spade grips of an M60 machine gun. To a casual observer, they looked almost bored, calm, collected, just another day at the office. But if you zoom in, you can see it in their eyes. A 1,000-yard stare that told a story of sheer terror and the brutal weight of war. These were the door gunners. Today, we're going behind the lens to see just how suicidal their job really was, why they were the primary targets for every sniper in the jungle, and how a field improvisation changed the face of aerial warfare forever. It's a fact often forgotten, but helicopters didn't start as the apex predators of the sky. They dipped their rotors into combat for the first time back in the 1940s, during the closing chapters of World War II. Back then, machines like the Sikorsky R-4 were little more than flying kites with engines. They were used sparingly, mostly for niche rescue missions where planes simply couldn't go. They were experimental, dangerously fragile, and often more a liability than an asset. But they proved one revolutionary concept. By the time 1950 rolled around and the Korean War ignited, helicopters like the Bell H-13 Sioux were ready to step up. They were the angels of the battlefield, famously seen in MASH, carrying wounded soldiers on external litters. But they were still soft targets. A single, lucky rifle round from a peasant on the ground could sever a hydraulic line, puncture a fuel tank, or shatter a rotor blade, sending the bird spiraling into a mountain. Armor was non-existent because the engines simply weren't strong enough to carry the weight of steel. For a decade, pilots just had to cross their fingers and hope. Then came Vietnam, and everything changed. This wasn't a war of front lines or grand tank battles. This was a war of shadows, mud, and endless canopy. The jungle made traditional American tactics, heavy bombers and massive infantry maneuvers, nearly useless. The military In the early days, Hueys were basically flying delivery trucks. They were called slicks because they were unarmed and stripped down to carry as many troops as possible. The brass thought speed and maneuverability were armor enough. They were dead wrong. The Viet Cong and NVA were master tacticians. They learned to predict flight paths. They timed the landing rotations. When the casualties became too high to ignore, the Army didn't provide a solution. The soldiers did. It was field improvisation at its finest. At first, crew chiefs started taking their personal rifles and firing out the open doors. The door gunner's job quickly evolved into the most dangerous occupation in the entire theater. They were more exposed than the frontline infantry. While the pilots had at least some armored seats to sit in, the gunners were literally hanging out of a... As the war intensified, so did the Hualuk. The M60 was joined by dual mounts, then the devastating M134 minigun, a 6-barreled monster that could shred a tree line in seconds. Some Hueys stopped carrying troops altogether. They became gunships, bristling with rocket pods and grenade launchers. They operated in pink teams. The slicks would draw the fire, and the gunships would swoop in like... Behind the cool image of a gunner in flight was a reality of pure terror. People always ask, did they fall out? Yes. Centrifugal force in a sharp bank could toss a man like a rag doll. Most wore a monkey harness, a long strap anchored to the floor. Entering a hot LZ was like flying into a beehive of tracers. One veteran pilot described it as pushing the stick down into a cloud of fire, praying the engine wouldn't quit. The door gunners would fire continuously, clearing a path for the infantry jumping into the tall grass. If you want to understand the spirit of these men, look at Gary Wetzel. In 1968, his Huey was slammed by an RPG. The explosion did. But we have to talk about the dark truth too. Shooting from a vibrating, moving platform at 100 knots is not precision work. Gunners had to aim behind to compensate for the wind and momentum. In the chaos of the jungle, where the enemy looked like the local farmers, split-second decisions were made. Sometimes, those decisions were wrong. In a war with no rules and no front lines, the tragedy of civilian casualties was a weight many gunners carried home long after the guns went silent. Eventually, the military realized the Huey had been pushed past its breaking point. It was time for a specialist. The AH-1 Cobra was born, the first dedicated attack helicopter. It was thin, armored, and built solely for the kill. No more dangling out of doors. The weapons were